The match that stopped the desert Indian Wells is known for its heat. But on the afternoon of March 6, 2026, the most intense energy in the California desert had nothing to do with the temperature. It was concentrated inside Stadium 3, where a first-round match that the tournament schedulers had quietly tucked away from the main stage was drawing the kind of attention usually reserved for finals. On one side of the net, Dayana Yastremska of Ukraine, a seasoned professional and former world number 21, known for a game built on raw aggression, powerful ground strokes, and the kind of warrior mentality forged through years of competing at the highest level. On the other, Alex Eala of the Philippines, 20 years old, trained at the Rafa Nadal Academy, carrying with her not just a tennis racket, but the hopes and passion of an entire nation that had waited a very long time for this moment. What unfolded over the next 2 hours was not simply a tennis match. It was a statement. Before the first ball was struck, the atmosphere around Stadium 3 in the hours before the match was unlike anything the tournament had witnessed in years. Filipino fans had descended on the venue in numbers that seemed to defy the capacity of the facility. Flags the size of bedsheets, banners in blue, red, and gold, and a noise level that had security personnel and tournament officials exchanging concerned glances long before the warm-up began. Those inside the Eala camp described a player who was unusually still, focused in a way that went beyond routine pre-match preparation. The Rafa Nadal Academy has built its reputation not just on developing technical tennis skills, but on producing players capable of managing pressure at the highest level, players who understand that matches are often decided in the mind before they are decided on the court. By all accounts, Eala had absorbed that lesson completely. Her practice session that morning had drawn its own audience. Coaches and analysts who happened to pass court 7 during her warm-up reportedly slowed their pace and stopped. The precision of her ground strokes, the variety of her shot selection, and above all the quality of what those around her were beginning to call her hybrid strike, a seamless transition from defense to attack built on exceptional footwork and early ball contact, left observers quietly reassessing what kind of match was coming. Yastremska's coaching team, by multiple accounts, had done their homework. They had studied Eala's game in detail and arrived with a plan. But watching her practice in person, in the dry desert air, with the California wind playing its own role in the flight of the ball, reportedly produced a different reaction than reviewing footage on a screen. Her coach was seen in animated discussion with his staff. His message, according to those nearby, was blunt. Eala's control of the ball in these conditions was exceptional, and if Yastremska relied on power alone without adjusting her approach, she would be in serious trouble. Yastremska herself, when asked in a brief pre-match interview about the crowd and the occasion, gave an answer that few expected from a player of her experience and reputation. "It feels like I am playing against an entire country," she said quietly, "not just one girl. The noise in my head is louder than the wind." It was a rare moment of candor from a player not known for revealing vulnerability. And for those who heard it, it suggested that the psychological dimension of this match had already tilted in one direction before a single point had been played. The strategy Eala's team had built. What made Eala's game plan particularly fascinating was how deliberately it had been constructed around the specific conditions of Indian Wells. The desert environment presents unique challenges for professional tennis players. The dry air, the altitude, and the wind, unpredictable gusts that sweep across the open courts in patterns that can be difficult to anticipate, affect the ball differently than in the controlled indoor environments of Melbourne or the heavy clay of Roland Garros. Players who rely on flat, high-speed hitting can find that the ball carries differently than expected, disrupting timing and rhythm in ways that are difficult to compensate for mid-match. Eala's team had reportedly studied this carefully. Rather than meeting Yastremska's power with power, a contest the Ukrainian, with her years of experience and physical strength, would likely have won, Eala had prepared to use the conditions themselves as a weapon. A heavily topspun ball hit with the right trajectory in desert wind doesn't just bounce high. It moves. It kicks. It demands a kind of adjustment that disrupts rhythm and creates errors even from technically accomplished players. Coupled with that was a drop shot game that Eala had been refining for weeks. The logic was straightforward. Yastremska's strength lies at the baseline. She is most dangerous when she can plant her feet, load her weight, and drive through the ball with maximum force. The drop shot takes that away entirely, forcing her forward, off balance, into territory where her game is far less comfortable. It was, as one analyst observing from the broadcast booth would later describe it, not just a tennis strategy. It was a chess game, designed to make Yastremska fight on multiple fronts simultaneously and wear her down physically and mentally over the course of the match. The first set, patience and precision. From the opening games, Eala imposed her rhythm on the match with a confidence that surprised even those who had watched her practice. She was not trying to overpower Yastremska. She was trying to confuse her. One rally would end with a heavy, kicking topspin that rose sharply off the desert surface and pushed the Ukrainian well behind the baseline. The next would begin with a low, skidding slice that barely rose above the net and forced her to bend awkwardly into an uncomfortable position. And then, just as Yastremska adjusted her positioning and her mindset to handle baseline exchanges, a feathery drop shot would fall just over the net, pulling her into a full sprint forward before she had time to reset. The effect was cumulative. Each individual shot was manageable, but the combination, the relentless variety, the refusal to give Yastremska a consistent pace to work with, began to show in the Ukrainians' body language within the first few games. She is a player built on momentum. When she finds her range, when the ball is sitting up and she can drive through it cleanly, she is genuinely dangerous. But Eala gave her almost nothing to drive through cleanly. Every time Yastremska loaded up for a big hit, something changed: the trajectory, the pace, the spin, the angle, and the result was either a difficult recovery or an outright error. The crowd, which had been buzzing with excited noise from the first point, found moments of eerie collective silence at changeovers, a deliberate, unified stillness that seemed to press down on the Ukrainian side of the court with a weight that was palpably uncomfortable. Yastremska's coach, watching from the player's box, was visibly agitated. He could see what was happening. His player was not being beaten by power. She was being outthought, point by point, in broad daylight, in front of a crowd that was willing her opponent towards something historic. Eala took the first set 6-2. The second set, the pressure deepens. If the first set had been a controlled demonstration, the second became something more intense. Yastremska, to her credit, came out with renewed aggression in the opening games of the second set. She had clearly been given specific instructions: be more direct, shorten the rallies, take more risks on the big points, and try to seize control of the match before Eala could settle into her rhythm again. For a few games it worked. The Ukrainians' first serve percentage improved. She was stepping inside the baseline earlier, taking Eala's slice on the rise, and generating the kind of flat, forceful hitting that had carried her to a career ranking inside the top 25. But Eala adjusted. That capacity to adapt in real time, to recognize what an opponent is doing and respond with something different, is one of the qualities that coaches at the highest level speak about when they try to separate very good players from great ones. It cannot easily be taught. It has to be felt. Midway through the second set, Eala began varying her serve more deliberately, mixing wide deliveries with body serves that jammed Yastremska's swing and prevented her from generating full extension. She started attacking the net more often on short balls, cutting off angles, and forcing the Ukrainian into passing shots she clearly didn't feel comfortable with under pressure. The drop shot game, if anything, became more devastating. As the match wore on and Yastremska's legs tired from the repeated sprints forward, Eala began using the threat of the drop shot as a tactical tool even when she wasn't playing it, drawing Yastremska forward mentally, causing her to second-guess her positioning, to edge slightly toward the net in anticipation, only to be punished with a deep, heavily spun ball to the empty baseline behind her. It was, in its own way, a masterclass in tactical tennis. Not the spectacular kind that generates highlight reels. The quiet kind that wins matches. The medical timeout with Eala serving for the match and controlling the second set with clear authority, Yastremska called for a medical timeout. There was no visible sign of injury. No clutched shoulder, no favored ankle, no obvious discomfort. She walked to the side of the court and sat down with her trainer, stretching in a way that appeared more procedural than urgent. The crowd's reaction was immediate and vocal. Those who had been cheering in celebration switched to a different register, a frustrated, indignant energy that made clear they understood exactly what was happening. In the professional game, medical timeouts are a legitimate and often necessary part of competition. But they are also, at times, used tactically, a way of disrupting an opponent's rhythm, breaking their momentum, and buying time to reset the psychological balance of a match. It is a gray area, and everyone watching on that afternoon understood it as such. What followed surprised many. Instead of sitting down during the stoppage, Eala stayed on the court. She stood near the baseline, racket in hand, and continued to move, shadow swings, footwork patterns, small adjustments of her grip and stance. She was not going to allow the interruption to cool her down, physically or mentally. In the player's box, her father was seen leaning forward and speaking quietly to the coaching staff. Those nearby reported that he appeared calm, not nervous, not anxious, settled in a way that communicated something specific to the people around him, that whatever was happening on the other side of the net, the outcome of this match was not in doubt. That message, in whatever form it traveled from the box to the court, appeared to land. When play resumed, Eala was, if anything, more focused than before. Match point: the final game unfolded the way the match itself had, with Eala in control, dictating the terms, and Yastremska unable to find an answer. The match point came at the end of a 22-shot rally that began with both players trading ground strokes from deep behind the baseline. Yastremska fought for every ball. She chased down shots that looked like winners, redirected the rally, and pushed Eala to keep finding new angles. But the rally ended the way so many before it had, with Eala reading the play a fraction of a second before it happened, positioning herself with a quiet, unhurried efficiency that observers had been commenting on all week, and driving a forehand winner to the far corner of the court with a combination of pace and placement that left Yastremska planted at the opposite baseline with no possible response. The roar from the stadium was enormous. Flags went up. People who had traveled thousands of miles to be in that desert arena in the middle of California held each other and wept. For many of them, this was not simply a tennis match they had attended. It was a moment they would tell their children about. Final score: 6-2, 6-1. The moment at the net. What happened at the net after the final point was the image that traveled furthest. Eala crossed to greet Yastremska in the standard post-match exchange. But instead of the brief, functional handshake that most professional matches conclude with, she held the Ukrainian's hand for a moment longer than expected. She leaned in and said something quietly. No one in the stands could hear what it was. And then she gestured, pointing first at her own team, then at Yastremska, then at a spot in the air somewhere above the court where both nations might be said to exist together. Yastremska, who had entered the match as the favorite and left it having been outplayed in nearly every aspect of the game, nodded. What Eala said in that moment has not been publicly confirmed. But the image of the two players standing together at the net, the crowd still roaring around them, a young Filipino woman who had just delivered one of the most complete performances of her career pausing to offer something private and human to the opponent she had just defeated, that image said more than any score or statistic could. What it all meant: Alex Eala came to Indian Wells 2026 with a ranking of 31 in the world and a reputation built on junior Grand Slam titles, a remarkable run at Miami, and a level of public interest that had already made her one of the most talked about players on the tour. What she demonstrated against Yastremska was something different. Not the talent of a promising young player riding emotion and circumstance to an unexpected result, but the controlled, intelligent, mature performance of a player who understood exactly what she was doing, exactly why she was doing it, and exactly how to do it under pressure. She had used the conditions. She had exploited the tactical matchup. She had managed the psychological dimension of the match with a composure that players twice her age sometimes struggle to produce. And when her opponent had tried to disrupt her with a strategic delay, she had responded not with frustration or anxiety, but with more of what had already been working: quiet, steady, unshakable focus. At the Rafa Nadal Academy in Majorca, where Eala has trained since she was a teenager, the philosophy is not simply about developing technically skilled players. It is about building champions, people who can withstand the full weight of a high-stakes moment and perform not despite the pressure, but through it. On March 6th, 2026, in the California desert, with an entire nation watching and an established professional opponent standing across the net, Alex Eala showed the tennis world exactly what that philosophy looks like when it works. The masterclass was complete, and Indian Wells was just beginning.